And fighting has resumed in Sudan. Despite a ceasefire agreement, essential resources such as food and water are scarce, and the United Nations Humanitarian Office says gas prices are surging. So for the latest, I want to bring in Paul Adams. He's a diplomatic correspondent with our partners at the BBC. Thanks so much for joining us. I know the connection is a little shaky at times. It's quite loud there. What more can you tell us about the fighting resuming and how it could impact evacuations of foreign nationals?
Well, Anne-Marie, yes, there is sporadic fighting, and that has been the case, really, I think, since this ceasefire came into effect a day and a half ago, and I suspect it will stay that way. The assessment is that it is not sufficiently serious to interrupt the ongoing evacuation of foreign nationals, something that is continuing from a military airstrip some distance to the north of the capital, Khartoum. That has been going on. The British have been heavily involved in that. They've had 2 or 3 flights that have already taken British nationals out. Other nationalities have also been involved. And while there are accusations from the 2 warring parties about breaches of the ceasefire, clearly the view of the Western powers involved in that evacuation is that it is sufficiently safe for it to take place. However, it is obviously proving very difficult for some civilians who would like an opportunity to get on board one of those planes to actually make it out of the city, through the checkpoints, through dangerous streets to reach that place. There's also a lack of fuel, a lack of transport. It's becoming harder and harder.
As you know, fighters in Sudan have seized the country's national public laboratory. What more can you tell us about that situation?
Yeah, Vlad, the main public health laboratory in the country, and a place where, in keeping with all such laboratories, technicians were looking at all sorts of pathogens, the sorts of pathogens that any country needs to keep a lid on to prevent outbreaks of common but deadly diseases. That fell into the hands of an armed group. We do not know which of the armed parties it was in the last couple of days. Clearly, any time something like that happens, it poses a threat, because you don't want armed men running around in a biological lab in which these pathogens are being stored, presumably in conditions of some safety. So that obviously is a source of concern for the authorities at the World Health Organization.
We're also learning that a former politician that was suspected of war crimes has been freed during the fighting. What are you hearing?
Yeah, so he's one of a number of former associates of the former president Omar al-Bashir, who was ousted after months of popular protest back in 2019. Omar al-Bashir and a lot of his associates were put in jail at the time. A lot of them, including the former president, are wanted by the International Criminal Court on accusations of genocide and other crimes against humanity for their actions in earlier conflict in Sudan, back in the 2000s, and particularly in the Darfur region in southern and western Sudan. As a result of prisons being liberated during this chaotic situation, some of those former associates are now out and about, and some Western observers, and indeed some Sudanese officials, regard this as potentially a worrying factor, because these are people who have their loyalties, have their hands covered in, frankly, quite considerable quantities of Sudanese blood, and could be looking to play a role again. I should say that Omar al-Bashir himself, about whom there were some questions about his whereabouts, he is believed to be receiving medical treatment in a military hospital in Khartoum. He's actually quite elderly.
All right, Paul Adams with the BBC. Paul, thank you very much.